Good afternoon and welcome to Nove Mesto in the Czech Republic for the second day of racing in these Biathlon World Championships for 2013. The mixed relay 2 days ago. Today it is the sprinters' turn to take their place on the start line, and the men going first. A huge field of over 130 athletes entered for this race, and it's pretty difficult to choose who's going to win this one because all the favourites seem to be coming to form at exactly the right time of the season. But there are one or two names that stick out above the rest, and we'll have a chat, I think, with Mickey Grice, who might give us some idea who's going to come out on top in this particular race. Well, let's have a look at the programmes first. The sprint going off at 16:15. That's today for the women's sprint, and the pursuits obviously tomorrow, both for the men and the women. At the same time start tomorrow for the men's pursuit as today's sprint, and then of course we get a couple of days off. That's unusual in a World Championship programme before the individual event, and the men actually getting 3 days off. They're not going to know what to do with themselves around here, and that will be an interesting exercise in keeping themselves occupied and of course keeping their form at the very highest level. The relays later on next week, and then of course the mass starts. Finish it off on the 17th of Feb, and what an event that is going to be, with all the form athletes entering that particular event. Well, the snow conditions are just about perfect. The temperature's been hovering around -4 to -6 for the last couple of days. We had a little bit of fresh snow at 5 to 2 yesterday afternoon, and since that's settled and been pressed, there's been nothing but perfectly cold conditions, and the tracks look immaculate. Well, Mickey Grice.
Bei den Herren sind natürlich zwei.
Obviously retiring earlier this season. He's saying there are two big names that we need to watch out for, Martin Fourcade and Emil Hegler-Svensson. So they'd have a really good season so far. One or two problems with their running form, their skiing form, but that seems to have got a little bit closer over the last few days. And coming into the World Championships with expert preparation, I think it's a difficult one to call. However, there are others that we need to watch out for, says Mickey. Jakub Fak, Andy Bernbacher, the Russians, of course, with Shipulin, who won the last sprint, and he's looking forward to seeing how Terje Bo and Oleana Bjorndalen get on for Norway, as they've had an enormous amount of time to prepare for this race, and he thinks they're going to be on good form. He says whatever, it's going to be a very, very close race. Well, thanks to Mickey, and we'll see how accurate his forecasts are. We'll obviously have a chat with Mike Dixon in a minute and see if he feels Mickey Grice has got the right men to watch out for. Well, Martin Fourcade going through his training routine, and he, like most of the big names, has chosen to go in group number 1 today. Well, welcome back to Nove Mesto. All the athletes for the men's sprint going through their warm-up routines with over 130 athletes. There'll be an enormous amount of time between the first starter and the last starter. That always causes problems if the weather changes, but as we mentioned just before the break, it's been very stable over the last couple of days, and we hope it remains so until the end of today at the very least. Not a lot of wind to contend with, so pretty much a skiing competition at the moment. Vincent Gay also retiring early this season. He's on hand for Eurosport as well, and he's saying today the championships really gets underway with the first individual event over 10 kilometers. So there are two different ways to approach this race. The athletes that entered the mixed relay already have some idea of their own potential, but they need to be careful that they conserve their energy. And of course there are those athletes who haven't had a run out yet, and they have no idea what sort of form they're in until they get on the tracks today, so they'll be tempted to start very strongly, and that can certainly cost at the end of the run. The first part of the track is flat and then a downhill, so you have to build your speed early in the race. You don't have an option there. He says there's not so much wind to contend with in the shooting range, so we shouldn't see any major surprises. Anyway, he thinks the World Championships really being started today with the individual. I think many people would disagree. Certainly the Czechs would disagree, Mike, after such a fantastic mixed relay. Best mixed relay we've ever had. It had everything in it, except perhaps for the sprint finish between Svensson and Forcada. But to get the home nation on the podium on day one, the perfect way to get the championships underway.
I think so. Interesting that Vincent says that it really starts the day. Well, yes, it does for the individuals, but for me, the mixed relay 2 days ago was one of the best biathlon races we've seen for a very long time. It had everything, as you say, except that little sprint to the line.
Yeah, and some of the big teams making big mistakes. The Germans, well, everyone thinking they had a bad skis on their feet. Henkel was below par, Gustner was losing time to the leaders, and the men didn't do much better. The German technicians, or their partners, not prepared to admit that they got the skis wrong, but they're certainly under a bit of pressure to produce some results today, and particularly in this men's sprint event, and they'll be looking to Andy Bernbacher, I guess, and it would be nice to see Arndt Pfeiffer come back and show some sort of form.
Well, and I think they've put him, sadly he's at the very end of Group 3 where the conditions will be a little more broken up, on certainly in the ski track wise. But it would be great to see Arndt Pfeiffer come through today. I think Bernbacher, you mentioned, he had a poor relay by his standard mixed relay. I think he'll be back in this one.
Well, not unusually, all the favourites have decided to go early on, and all the big names in Group 1, those who've had the option. 43 starters in Group 1, many more entrants, because even the weaker teams are allowed, or the top 25 teams in the World Cup standings are allowed to enter 4 competitors. So the British go from having 2 to having 4, and the same with many of the minor nations. That doesn't really cause a problem for the big teams, Mike, do you think? Or do you think there's going to be a lot of congestion out there on the tracks, particularly on those technical turns?
It's a good point. You've got some athletes that are in the first group. Remember, there's 43 in the first group, the preferred group. Yes, there's some athletes who have only raced IBU Cup this season. And maybe there will be a certain amount of road blocking, but certainly the faster athlete's entitled to shout track, and the slower athlete must move out of the way. So hopefully there won't be any issues. Have a look at the flags though. Certainly throughout zeroing it's been a little fluctuating as normal, so we saw Milishko struggle with that little breeze from the left, and that cost the Russians certainly a medal. His little error. Yeah, there you see the tracks. Doesn't give you any idea of the profile. The hills certainly aren't as demanding as they are in Ruhpolding. They'll be glad of that. We're not at the altitude that we were in Antolz. We're half the altitude at 800 meters here compared to the 1600 of Antolz. So that will play into the hands of perhaps the weaker athletes. But Mike, it's still, there's not a lot of rest out on this course. There's not. The athletes are saying it's when you ski it in training, it feels quite easy. When you push it in the race, as they did in the mixed relay, it is a difficult test. I think the 351 meters climb within this 10 kilometers is an indication of how big the hills are out here.
Well, what a stadium they've built. It's a slightly bizarre situation. You travel through miles and miles of countryside with just the odd village. Certainly not showing a huge amount of wealth, and farms, small villages, and then suddenly you come to this unbelievable stadium, perhaps the biggest that we've got on the world circuit now. And the stadium itself seating 24,000 can get into the stadium, and the other day we had almost 27,000 fans coming up. 1 or 2 seats still empty, but we've got a few minutes to go before the start. Hopefully they'll fill up. Certainly with the Czechs getting a bronze in that mixed relay, Mike, that was just the kick-start we needed.
I think they did amazingly well, and the spectators, as you say, 24,000 the other night came in to watch that. Certainly for the home nation, you could not wish for a better start. And a little pressure, you could maybe say today, for of course, Murovitz, who took the last leg and hit 10 out of 10 in the relay. His expectations, or the spectators' expectations, are on his shoulders today. But Michael Schlesinger back in, not as well as he hoped. He's had a little cold lately, but sometimes that maybe takes the pressure off for him.
Well, before the race gets underway, just time to say thanks to those of you who've sent in emails. Do keep in touch throughout the competitions. Biathlon.eurosport@yahoo.com. IBU.com or .co.uk. Both seem to be working okay. Stephen wants to know whether Tora Berger's mum was in the crowd during the mixed relay. Haven't got a clue, actually, Stephen. We'll check that out. Lots of Norwegian press here, as you would expect. We'll do our best to research that one. If she was, she will have been one proud lady, because Tora Berger set an unbelievable standard on the first leg of the mixed relay. Do you think she's going to win this afternoon?
Oh, her form to go in the mass start, to lead it so decisively two nights ago. I think she has to be certainly the favourite for today. Zaitseva did look good, though, in the mixed relay. And, of course, there are the athletes who didn't take part in the mixed relay, who are you could argue, are slightly more rested and recovered coming into this one.
Well, we've got an email from Susan as well, saying appreciating what we said about the French and the Norwegians. The Norwegians have a reputation of being a team of individuals. The French are a fantastic team. Incidentally, after their silver medal in the mixed relay, they went straight to the waxing cabin where they set up a fondue. Typically French, not the sort of place you'd want to be eating fondue with all the fumes going around, but they were there for a couple of hours after the race, just celebrating the fact that things had started well. And when the French start well, they tend to continue on the same vein. So maybe we're waiting for another medal going their way. Martin Fourcade, the hot favourite to win today. But Susan wants to know what the spirit in the Russian team is like. Well, I can tell you that Zaitseva was furious after the mixed relay, because the women did so well, and then the men threw it away. Malishko with that penalty loop. To be fair to Zaitseva, she did go straight over to Malishko to console him, but behind the scenes she was seething after such a good start to the race.
The feeling, though, within the Russian team, you sense the pressure is on them all, but there is good spirit between the athletes.
So the first athletes are on their marks now, and it will be Hidenori Issa of Japan who gets this race underway. Remember, it's a 10-kilometer race, 2 chutes included, first in the prone, second in the stand. Unlike the relay, they only have 10 rounds to hit the 10 targets. Any misses incur that 150-meter loop, which is a long way away from us. It's an oval-shaped loop. In fact, oval-shaped with one side of it, or the bottom end of it, is square. So a couple of really tight corners, and it will sap the legs of energy. So away we go, and Japan hoping for certainly a top 40 would be good for Issa. If he hits 10 out of 10, he's certainly capable of that.
Yeah, well, last year, you're right, he was 56 last year, and I think he missed 2 targets then. He certainly has that potential, and top 40 at World Champs would be quite incredible for him.
Now, we know that Jarkko Kauppinen can go well. But I don't think you bet too much money on it. His record, Mike, he had a fantastic start to the season.
He did. Up in Östersund, he hit all 20 in the individual race. 20 out of 20, finished 10th position. He needs 10 out of 10 today, I believe, to make it into the top 50. You need to ski fast, and he doesn't quite have the ski legs, as say this man.
Well, here is a man who is now ranked #1 in Sweden. He's gone past Ferry, he's gone past Bergman, and Freddie Lindström looking to do something spectacular. 6th in Ruhpolding in the World Championships last year, hitting 9 out of 10. If he goes 10 out of 10, he's certainly a potential winner, but he's going to have to hope that Svensson and Fourcade, the 2 faster skiers, make mistakes. That is quite possible. Only 23 years old, Lindström, so he's got a long future ahead of him when you consider that we still have men in their late 30s racing at the top level. So Lindström, if he sticks around, could well be one of the big names in a couple of years' time, or may even be next year in Sochi.
Yeah, 23 years old. He's done so much. He's won a World Cup, and he really has potential. Almakov, a really nice guy. Alex had a good chat, or Alexei, I had a chat with him down in Obertiliac. He came along to the Junior World Championships. His story's interesting, Patrick. He had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to wash dishes and to work before to train before he went to work, washing dishes, to make money to take his 4-month racing season.
Well, there's nothing wrong with working for your passion. Often, the more you do, the hungrier you are for success. He knows that success will mean that he can give up the dishwashing.